Welcome to Daddy's Podcast.
This is the Redefining Plastics Podcast with Justin Riney. Welcome to the Redefining Plastics Podcast. My name is Justin Riney. Thanks for joining again. Today, we've got an interesting conversation. Chresten Heide-Anderson, and he's here to talk to us about a wide range of topics. I've got to know him over LinkedIn here over the last probably 2 months. Once again, highlighting the great tool that LinkedIn can be, connecting people all across the world. So, Chresten, thanks for joining today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm from Denmark, and I'm responsible for the Danish and Norwegian EPS associations. And actually starting this month, I'm also going to be the director of the new Nordic EPS Alliance. I'm also vice president of UMEPS, which is the European EPS Association, and I'm part of the steering team of GISA, the Global EPS Alliance. So I work with EPS, expanded polystyrene, as a plastic lobbyist.
Okay. Do you deal at all with Jens at SCS? The Styrenic Circular Solutions? Okay.
Yeah, we do a little bit. They're more focused on the non-expanded part of the polystyrene business, and I deal more with expanded polystyrene. But
so you're dealing with Betsy quite a bit, I'm assuming, here.
I'm dealing with Betsy at EPSIA.
Yeah. She's a great advocate. She is a bulldog too. She'll get in there and get things done. I've always appreciated her style and how she does things. So here in the U.S., we're starting the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance later this month, actually. And it's going to be for both EPS and rigid polystyrene, where we're trying to expand the access and recycle rates of polystyrene in North America. As we understand, we're under a lot of pressure. So that's going to be interesting. So we're kind of kindred spirits here. We're both fighting the battle for styrenics, which I don't think we need or we should need to fight a battle to save EPS. I think it's an amazing product. It's 98% air, but not everybody feels the same way, right? So,
no.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your... Go ahead.
It is a unique product with excellent uses for a number of applications. And of course, there are other applications where you don't want to use EPS. I mean, Europe banned the use of EPS bottles 6 years ago. It's kind of funny because the product has never been made on the market, but they banned it anyways.
They're preemptively banning.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your backstory, and how you got into this business? It's always interesting to me to hear how people got into any kind of plastics role.
Okay. A little bit about me before the plastics industry. Have a master's in political science and an MBA, done journalism courses. So basically my career has been about making people talk with each other. It's about communication, because political science and MBA, those are fields where you have different areas of expertise. And so I try to get people that don't talk the same disciplinary language together. So I've not been in the plastics industry. I got a call from a headhunter say, "Hey, do you want to have a cup of coffee?" And that was 6-7 years ago, led me to becoming the project manager of the Danish EPS Association. One step led to another. And then now I'm here talking with you, and been to the INCs for plastics treaty negotiations and other stuff. I don't really think that was in the cards 7 years ago.
Yeah, if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I'd have been in the plastics industry, I said no. I would have been a history professor at some university somewhere. That was the goal. The goals change, right? Goals change a lot. But you mentioned the INC process, so the UN Global Plastics Treaty. How did you find those events? I've heard mixed reviews, but I'd be very interested to get your feedback on how you felt like those went.
I think there's this joke that says, how do you how do you eat an elephant in small bites? I'm not an expert to international negotiations or anything like that. But what I heard from people is that typically negotiating any kind of treaty takes 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And this one seems to be a little more complicated. So trying to force a 8-year negotiation into 2 years seems like not trying to chew or eat an elephant in small bites, but rather taking it in one bite. And that is probably not the best way to do it.
Well, and you understand why they did it that way, right? Because to the UN and to the folks within the UN, they viewed this as a crisis that needed to be mitigated. So they wanted to expedite the process. But to your point, maybe that's not the best way to get the best possible result out of this. I understand that they wanted to move quickly, but moving quickly doesn't always equate to solid results. I don't know. I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
Well, we will see, and we will see in 6 years if they've managed to end something and where they wanted it to go. I mean, I recognize that we have a challenge with plastic litter. We have a challenge with plastic waste, and we have a challenge with not recycling enough plastic. Yes. And a treaty like that can certainly solve it. I think the treaty is trying to solve problems that, and we will get into this later, I think, but it's trying to solve challenges without looking at what are the alternatives.
Okay.
So if you're not using plastic, you're going to use another material. What is the climate impact of that? So replacing plastic is not just going to be like, oh, then that's not going to be an environmental impact. Cement, glass, paper, cardboard, you name it, will also have an environmental impact. And that impact is something we need to consider as well. Just like replacing one plastic with another plastic will have an impact. So we, and there's this sort of, oh, we should remove plastic because it releases CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions. Yes, it does. But it's not that if we stop using plastic, those greenhouse gas emissions won't be there anymore. They're going to be from other kinds of packaging or other kinds of building materials or whatever you're using it for. Focusing on all the climate issues should be left to a climate treaty. And then we should have a plastics treaty dealing with how do we effectively manage plastic.
Yeah. So waste management in third world or island nations and things like that, or fines, making sure that there's a buyback program, so a redemption system, all of those good things, right?
Yeah, and design guidelines. So we make sure that it's streamlined and we know what we're buying and what is the requirements for the recycled contents and is the recyclate the same and all of that. It's good if we can sort of push for more recycled content, because if something has value and waste that will be bought by manufacturers for recycled content will have value. So that will drive demand for recycled and EPS and plastic waste. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done. And then there's a lot of stuff that might be better solved somewhere else.
So I start every single one of these podcasts the same way. I ask one question. What do you think of when you hear the word plastic?
Solutions.
I like that. That's a new one. I get a lot of different answers, but that's a new one. What do you mean by solutions?
Well, I think the thing is that when you're talking about plastic, you're not talking about one thing. It's not like, oh, if you talk about metal, I mean, you have gold, you have platinum, you have copper, and you use it for different applications. And the same thing with plastic. It's not like one plastic can do everything because it's such a multitude of different materials in, at least for people that are in the industry, knows this. And that means it can be used for a number of solutions to challenges we face. That's why we use it, whether it be for milk bottles or for blood bags or for fish boxes, for insulation, whatever. We use plastic to solve a problem. So it's
Mhm.
plastic is something we use to solve a problem, and that's why it's a solution. And that's why we also need to consider always is that one solution should not be replaced by bigger or worse challenges to others. So to me, plastics is a solution.
So let's get into the meat of what I wanted to talk to you about, because you and I are both in the advocacy space. You're actually involved in running a trade organization. Like I said, we're starting a trade organization here. And to get that ball rolling, we've been doing a lot of work with legislators, NGOs, and I wanted to commiserate a bit with you on NGOs. Like there are center left NGOs, and then there are wide left NGOs. So not all NGOs are the same. So when for those that are listening, when I say NGOs, as non-governmental organizations that are specifically focused on either climate, so Greenpeace, or plastics like Beyond Plastics, or anything like that. So that's what we're talking about here. I get frustrated. Like I try to have open conversations with these groups because I think they're well-intentioned for the most part. Not all of them, but some of them are well-intentioned. They really do try to make a difference. But it seems like, to me, they're trying to equate us with, let's say, tobacco or some other horrible product out there that's destroying either human health or the world. They also appear to be using the same playbook. Like we've talked about this a little bit, with the NGOs appearing to be using their normal playbook to get things banned, similar to how they wanted to ban smoking because they wanted to solve for lung disease or COPD or whatever that may be. What are they getting wrong about that equation where they're trying to treat plastics in the same way that they've always tried to treat other kinds of nuisances?
First of all, I think there are a few things. I fully agree. I think have good intentions. I fully do that. One of the things I do as well, just to sidetrack a little bit, is I've started this newsletter on LinkedIn. I think that's why we sort of started discussing on cognitive biases and logical fallacies, is because I think that's really interesting in the whole advocacy thing, is because this has been a pet focus area for me, because I think you can learn a lot from understanding why people might have the best intentions, but then make the wrong conclusions. If you've been defending environmental issues for a number of years, then you're setting that sort of logic or mindset that might make it difficult to make some sort of discussions, or taking in, oh yeah, I never thought of that. It's really difficult to change sides if you understand what I mean. That sometimes make it complicated. And I'm guessing it's also about the culture working with. In Denmark, we have pretty good dialogue with a number of NGOs. So it's also about sort of the cultural setting and the practices in that region. I mean, well, Denmark is 5 million people, so it might be easier to talk with them than in the States. But in any case, tobacco is, I'm thinking maybe NGOs have been like, how do we see a problem, how do we solve it? And they've sort of done what they've always done. And as you were saying, when it comes to tobacco, you have a result, cancer or lung diseases or whatever. That's a direct result of an unwanted action. So the smoking cannot occur if you don't have the tobacco. So you ban tobacco, you get rid of smoking, you get rid of cancer. It's pretty simple analysis. But when it comes to plastic, the product isn't really the vehicle of the action. You can still have packaging without plastic. You can still have McDonald's Happy Meal toys that are just going to be just as much waste without plastic. We have cardboard books and toys of very low quality that are not made of plastic from McDonald's. It's still going to get thrown out. You know what I mean? It doesn't really reduce litter or waste or whatever by not using plastic, because the action isn't necessarily going to stop. And the action that you want to avoid is litter or waste reduction. So,
yeah,
but they're sort of focusing on plastic, just saying, oh, if you remove plastic, you won't have the waste. No, you will have different waste, because they've made that sort of link. Plastic, then you reduce the waste, but they're ignoring that there's an alternative that isn't there to smoking. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. So I do want you to plug your newsletter, because I've read at least the first one that you had sent my way. I don't know if you had done another one since then. The one that I read was highly insightful. So why don't you tell folks how they can see that or where they can find it?
They can find it on if they find me on LinkedIn, they can follow me and I share it. I'm pretty open to connecting with people on LinkedIn, at least if they sort of write why they want to connect with me. So just write a little bit or just follow me 2-3 times a month. I'm going to try to sort of explain or explore cognitive biases and logical fallacies in the context of EPS. But that's just because I know EPS that well. So I'm just trying to explain, how does this make sense, or why might this fallacy or this bias lead us to the wrong conclusions when the facts are this? So for instance, we've seen a lot of NGOs talk about EPS litter or it's marine waste. Well, that's because EPS is 98% air. We have a way assessing marine litter that is, we count pieces. So if you had an EPS cup, it will float. Other cups would sink. The EPS cup might break into 4 pieces. That would then count as 4 pieces while only being 4 grams. I don't know how much that is in US metrics, but we've only counted some of it, and it actually hits the beaches, and that's where we do our assessment. But when we look at the entire thing, it turns out that EPS is actually less than 0.5% of the marine litter. It accounts for about 3% of the global plastic production. Does that mean EPS is not a marine litter issue? Should we avoid EPS ending up in the marine environment? Yes, we should, but it's not going to solve the plastic pollution of the world ocean if we get rid of EPS, because it's such a minute part of the entire marine litter thing. But you can explain, when you know the processes and the logics, why people make that assumptions, because it's the visible plastic that you see on the beach.
Did you see the UC Santa Barbara tool with the Benioff Ocean group? All right. So I thought that was really interesting, just for the folks on the podcast that are listening. You could run different scenarios for ways to reduce waste or pollution, or in their words, but for us, we know it's litter, or leakage because material wasn't handled properly. So either there's no waste system in the country, so people were just illegally dumping wherever they can, or it's just not well controlled. The system's not well controlled. But if you put on there, ban polystyrene, it made minimal effect, because to your point, it's a very small portion of global production for packaging. And on top of that, we have a weight advantage with polystyrene, specifically with EPS, because it's 98% air. So if you go from 98% air to 100% of whatever else, be it another polymer or paper, you're actually increasing the amount of material used in that package. So you're not really solving for anything. It's moving from one to the other. And if anything, it's a net negative in my mind.
I think you're hitting on something there. And one of the things that when I started in 2018, there was just the introduction of the single-use plastics directive in Europe. And one of the things they did was ban EPS cups. And what happened was actually people started using these little white cups. And rather than using one, they would use 2 or 3, because the white cup, not as thermal protecting. So if you have hot coffee or soup or whatever, you would need to have double or triple cupping to protect your fingers. The white cup weighs 4 grams. The EPS cup weighs 4 grams. Now, the funny thing is I then at one thing just looked at it. The white cup turned out to be polystyrene. So actually the ban led to a tripling in the use of polystyrene, which I'm guessing the resin supplier was like, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it works for them. Yeah. It's not solving a problem, right? So I think it's important, though, to look at this from the other side, though, right? Because one thing that I get a lot on LinkedIn is that I have confirmation bias because I'm in the industry. So I'm picking and choosing data that looks good for plastics in order to refute what they think is a mountain of evidence for why plastics should be banned. I am cognizant of that. I try to pay attention to it. I try to make sure that I'm not just reading into what I see and what I read to be pro-plastics, and everything else I'm just pushing aside. What do you think about that? Do you think that we have a confirmation bias within the plastics industry? Where's your head at on all of that?
I think for certain that we have a cognitive bias. I think everybody does.
Yeah.
It's impossible not to have that. And that is actually what I'm trying to explore and look at in my newsletter. Because only if you're being aware of these are the challenges or pitfalls, you might be able to avoid that. I can't rule out that there are people in the plastics industry that may not have a cognitive bias and are ignoring stuff. I mean, there are bad people in any industry. So, I mean, it's not like, oh, the plastics is better or worse as an industry than other industries. I think that NGOs may have the same cognitive biases as we were talking about. So I think it's important to be aware and then try to have that open dialogue and saying, I don't understand this. Why I think it's important, a little bit linked to sort of the whole playbook that we discussed before. We should not look at the outputs of a process or necessarily the outcomes. So if we have a INC process, bans plastic, the outcome is we won't use plastic. But the impact of that will be something on climate, on waste, on whatever number of environmental parameters. To me, I'm guessing the NGOs want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or they want to reduce litter, or they want to achieve some sort of goal. And we need to make sure that the goal that you want to achieve is also actually achieved by whatever action you're taking. And that's sort of the process and the discussions that we need to look at. One of the things I noticed at these discussions, for instance, there's an NGO called SEAL. They've estimated that plastic take up 10 to 13% of the entire remaining carbon budget. That statement says, okay, if plastic takes up 10% of the carbon emissions, if we ban plastic, that gives up that much extra carbon or something. I think that's the logic. But we're still going to have to wrap whatever packaging we're using. We're still going to have to use metals for pipes or for insulation or whatever it is. And you can't ignore the climate impacts of alternatives. Then these NGOs had made a study say, okay, if we replace plastics with this, and this best alternative, and that would reduce climate impacts, then their logic would be good. But McKinsey and other have found that typically plastic has a lower climate impact when you look at the entire life cycle. Plastic may have a climate impact in the beginning, and it may also have a higher one at the end if you're incinerating it and not recycling it. But when you take the entire life cycle, it's typically better for the majority of applications. That does not mean that plastic cannot be replaced in some applications, or some plastic should be replaced by others. I mean,
I think there's some packaging that just shouldn't exist at all. What's interesting to me is lately on LinkedIn, I've been seeing a lot of posts of unnecessary packaging that's plastic, and people saying this is why plastic should be banned. And I think that's something we need to pay attention to. Because if we're using plastics in applications that we shouldn't even be doing in the first place, then it's just giving the other side a prime argument to come against us and say, look, here's plastic waste. We got to get rid of that.
I agree. I mean, when I went to Korea, a colleague of mine, we went to a temple to see, and there was a plastic cup with, I think it was pineapple that was cut into pieces, and every single piece was wrapped in plastic. I'm not sure that's a very good idea.
No, the pineapple does a pretty good job of keeping that fresh with its outer layer. So maybe we shouldn't cut it up in the first place.
Yeah. But then again, we've also just had COVID. And when you want to hand out, I have 3 kids. When my kids want to hand out candy for their birthday at school, it has to be individually wrapped because that was the requirements. And that's sort of, you don't want one kid to pick at something and then you have an entire class being homesick with the flu or whatever. So of course, individual wrapping makes sense sometimes, but it is something where that's not the plastic, it's the application or the use. And I'm guessing if we went from a plastic, you would wrap it in paper or something like that, and that would still be wasteful. And that's something we shouldn't do for certain applications.
Yeah, it wouldn't work if you use paper. You'd have to coat it with something. That something's more than likely going to be a thin layer of polyethylene. And so otherwise it's just going to, the butcher paper of old, where it's just PFAS paper because they had the grease protection. Everybody throws PFAS at plastics saying, hey, look at all the nasty stuff going in there. And it's like, I don't think they understand the amount of PFAS that went into paper to give grease protection. And it still exists in some areas, and that's a problem. The other argument that NGOs or even just individuals that I talk to use against plastics is overproduction or rampant expansion of production of plastics. Are we, as plastics professionals or plastic producers, causing this litter through overexpansion? Because that seems to be the connection people are making is overexpansion of plastic production leads to more and more and more litter in nature.
I think there are 2 questions there, if I understand you right. One is, do the plastics industry drive overproduction? And then are we responsible for litter? I think those are 2 different questions.
You can take it that way.
And if you go with is the plastics industry driving overproduction, it goes a little bit back to sort of the tobacco logic that you were referring to, because people were saying, well, the tobacco industry is creating consumers that are hooked on their product, so that uses up their product. But I don't buy products because they're wrapped in plastic. I'm guessing there are nobody else on earth that buys a product because it's wrapped in plastic they might be buying it because it's wrapped in paper, because we actually see that if you take a plastic bottle, wrap it in paper, people consider it more environmentally friendly than the same bottle without the paper, which is of course completely ludicrous. So we're not driving production because it's not consumers that are asking for plastic, the people that are selling Mars bars or whatever, that they want to sell their stuff to. So I buy the Mars bar that happens to be wrapped in something, if it's plastic or something else. I don't buy the plastic wrap, but it's the sort of the tobacco logic. Oh, it's the plastic we want to get rid of, so it must be the plastics industry that's driving consumption of plastic. But then again, you're back to the sort of the issue is that material would have to be replaced by something else, paper or coated with something or whatever.
We're just producing to demand, right? This is pure supply demand. That we've got enough people that want to buy the material, so we build new facilities to keep up with it. Right now, it's a little bit out of whack because of the growth of production in China or in Asia is kind of outstretched demand just a little bit. But it's not like we're just producing to start dumping into the market. We're producing to keep up with demand. And if the demand's not there, then we don't build new production facilities. It's not like we're trying to force plastics where it's not wanted. people are asking for it. The counter argument to that is the folks within NGOs that say that there isn't choice, that you have to use plastics in certain applications because the plastics industry or whatever is forcing it in there. What do you say to that?
I think that any company wants to explore ways to sell more product. I'm giving that. Can we find solutions where, well, this is not actually the resin supply or the raw material producers. Typically, it might be the converter saying, okay, I can use this product in this way, or I can make up this use for it. So of course, companies are trying to come up with ways to use the product that they're making to a wider range of audience. That's just how anything kind of works, but it's not like they're forcing it. They're trying to solve a problem that goes back to the answer to the first question is plastic is a solution. It's a solution to a challenge that people have. Keeping food fresh, insulating your house, making sure you get clean water that isn't filled with rust, making Barbie dolls or stuff like that. Some of the solutions that we come up with, the products aren't really that good. I mean, we just had Christmas. I'm sure a lot of people in the Western Hemisphere have bought one-time Christmas ornaments or stuff that will get thrown out, and it's wrapped in presents that have ribbons around them. And maybe those ribbons weren't necessary, but that's not really being pushed by the resin supplier. It's sort of a tradition. And you know what I mean? And we then replaced, plastic ribbons replaced cotton or textile ribbons from before, and which are better. I don't know. Plastic is cheaper, but I don't really think you're going to be using substantially more ribbon for that reason, because I mean, you can only wrap your presents so many times in a ribbon.
Kind of rolling back to the original question, everything you just talked about there, and then the growth in production, would you say that plastics producers have a hand in the growth of plastic litter in the world?
I think litter, again, that's a question where you can say we are responsible for the factories that we have. I've seen pictures of plastic manufacturing sites that were not well managed. Clearly, the industry has a responsibility for that production site if you have litter around it, just like anybody else would. But the plastic manufacturer responsible for their Mars wrapper ending up on the beach? No, I don't think so. Just as little as I say that, well, it's not called Mars, but the producer of the Mars bar is not responsible for that. Definitely don't understand how the logic goes that the manufacturer of the candy wrapper is responsible outside of the Mars bar producer, and then the consumer gets it and the plastic ends up on the beach. That's sort of, I don't understand that logic, because it has to be transferred somewhere. That being said, we have a responsibility, I think, to partner with our customers, with waste management companies and others, to ensure that our knowledge, our design, etc. I think we have a responsibility to partner with the entire value chain to ensure that we have proper waste management systems, put our knowledge into play. And if we do not do that, then we have a responsibility. If we're blocking requirements for having increased recycled content because we only want to have virgin materials, then we have a responsibility, because to have recycled content, we need to collect plastic waste because it becomes valuable. It becomes a resource. And people will put efforts into collecting resources. That's why we have waste pickers in a number of countries, because this material has value. So recycled content mandates are critical to solving this challenge. Actually, that University of California site and tool you were showing actually showed that recycled content mandates and investments in in waste infrastructures, if you did that substantially, you could actually reduce the whole mismanaged waste challenge by 80%. Those two solutions are by far the most effective ways of solving mismanaged and plastic litter.
And you just answered my next question, so we can just skip right beyond that, because I was going to ask you what are good solutions to that. I think the only other thing that I would add would be redemption systems at scale. Is the reason why metal, so aluminum cans, have consistently been recycled at higher rates because there's money involved, specifically in the U.S. I don't know about in Denmark, but I think if we can show that there's value, we can get people involved in the recycling system more. Because I've said this in every one of my podcasts, I believe, but only 43% of Americans who have access to recycle, that is, they have a curbside bin or there's a system in their city, actually recycle. So we need to get more people involved. And really, the best way to get Americans to do anything is to give them a monetary reason to do so. So if we can find a way to do that.
That's not just about Americans. That's
well,
about any.
That's all I can speak for. Yeah, that's all I can speak for, because that's what I know.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a reason why you don't. If you have a bottle in Denmark, you get 25 cents, something like that, for a bottle of soft drink, and people don't throw it away because it has that cognitive, oh, it's worth money, and you don't put 25 cents on there. You don't throw that out, so you don't throw it out. You make sure to get it. So linking that makes perfect sense, but I think it should be up to the EPR system.
Agreed there too.
To sort of figure out, how do we do that best? What's the best solution for that? I don't know what the best solution is in South Africa but I know that if you're putting monetary rewards to it, you can have pretty decent recycling rates. The recycling rate for polystyrene is above 31% in South Africa because they've linked it into that. So I just don't think we should define if it should be a reward system or how to do that. That has to go with the region or the country where that is, depending on legislation. But clearly, if people know something is value, and they don't throw it out. Maybe you should consider, if you didn't sort plastic or all kinds of materials well enough, we didn't pick up your mixed trash because you didn't sort it right. They should just leave it. I'm guessing they should only do that once or twice. And then you would say, okay, that's pretty annoying.
Yeah, I don't need trash in my house for another week or however long it takes for them to pick it up again. I didn't know the thing about the 31% recycle rate for polystyrene in South Africa. That's great news. I would like to hone in a little bit on EPS transport packaging, because the 31% rings a bell for me here in the U.S. because EPSIA says that 31% of EPS transport packaging in the U.S. is recycled annually, which is higher than PET bottles. It's definitely higher than mixed paper. Mixed paper is recycled at what, 6 to 8%, something like that. So anything that's not cardboard. That's the other thing I like to get out there in front of people is if you've got paper products that's not cardboard, it's probably not recycled.
I think it's because, or one of the things that you might, is EPS transport packaging being recycled is, well, EPS transport packaging covers fish boxes. A lot of this goes on in the commercial level, 31% recycling rate for transport packaging. I think that's right, because actually when you take EPS, you condense it, so you sort of squeeze all the air out. It can be sold for hundreds and hundreds of dollars for people that are recycling it. So it's a valuable resource. And a lot of EPS is being used in the business segment. So EPS, fish boxes, you might have transport packaging for white goods and others, where it's being collected in a business setting. And then I read this somewhere that EPS collections set up in some university twice a year. And that's when you move in to the dorm, because that's when you buy all the new TVs and refrigerators. But that's also when you get the EPS. You don't typically get EPS packaging on a daily basis. You get it when you
Yeah.
buy a TV, a refrigerator, or whatever. So you can sort of plan when you should have these drives or when you collect it, unless you use it for EPS storage packaging. That's when you have Christmas ornaments that you put back into the EPS packaging and you can store it for the holidays, and it does not decompose and does not really collapse. We also have a lot of electronics, kitchen appliances that we put back in the packaging because you can store them, and we only take them out. We have a chocolate fountain. Is that what it's called? So you have this huge tower with chocolate falls down. We use it once a year. We live in Denmark. We don't have very huge houses as they do in the States. So it's being stored away, but it's put back into the EPS storage packaging. So we can safely put it back into the cupboards and we can stack the stuff. But when you talk to people about EPS, to go back to that, they think about the cup. And, I can't recycle that. Yeah, but the cup weighs 4 grams, as I mentioned. PS packaging for your refrigerator weighs 2 pounds or 3 pounds. So there's a lot of EPS going into the stuff that's being recycled, where there's very little going stuff into applications that are challenging to collect and recycle effectively.
So what do you say to folks that want to ban plastics, and specifically those that want to ban polystyrene and EPS? I'm asking for me too, because this is my day job and to keep people from wanting to ban polystyrene.
Well, I asked them what it is they want to achieve, because there's a reason why they want to ban it. And unless it's because they say, hey, I want to ban polystyrene because then I can sell some other stuff. I mean, that's an argument. I don't think it's fair, but I mean, I can understand that. You see that with PVC. It's a pretty decent material. Other plastics can't create blood bags, or you can have tents. If they're made of PVC, they don't burn, but you might make PE tents. And if that's the reason why you want to ban PVC, then it's morally wrong. But I mean, I can't really argue with that. And the same thing if you want to ban EPS or polystyrene because you want to sell your own stuff, then I'm not going into that discussion. But the other people, the people that actually care, that have some sort of, I'm asking, what is it you want to achieve? Is it because you want to deal with marine litter? Well, that didn't solve that problem. Is it because you want to deal with climate impact? Then you're going to go back and say, okay, well, we have 30% recycling rates for EPS in the States. We also have EPS is one of the few plastics that are actually recognized globally by the United Nations Environmental Program that's recycled at scale. But a 30% recycling rate for EPS does not have the same environmental benefits as, say, a 80 or 90% recycling rate for cardboard. I mean, cardboard recycled at 80% is probably better than EPS at 30%, if you look at that. When you're looking at the studies that even the cardboard industry has put out, if you have 100% recycling of EPS and 100% recycling of cardboard, then EPS is the environmentally better solution. So I'm asking, why are you advocating this second best solution? If you have to change something, change the recycling and waste management infrastructure of EPS and ensure that we have high recycling rates. We have 90% recycling rate, or close to 90% recycling rate of EPS in Norway. We have 80% or more in South Korea. And there are several other countries where you have 70 to or more percent recycling rates for EPS. In Denmark, 60% of the local municipalities collect EPS at waste deposit areas. So you can go drop it off, have it recycled. And some of these municipalities introduced this in less than 4 months. They figured out and they built a huge site where they, we need to collect it, densify it, and sell it, because they said this makes sense from an environmental and an economic viewpoint. So back to the question, ask them, what is it we want to achieve? And do you actually have the desired impact of what you want to achieve? Because sometimes people are just thinking that they will have that because, plastic is made from fossil. That means it has climate impact. Yes, but the alternative will also have an impact. Which is the better of the solutions? And that's complex.
Yeah, I did a short video the other day talking about plastics versus paper and the complexity of the conversation, because I think people look at it as just a black and white, paper's better, ban plastics. But then when you start to actually look at the information behind it, yeah, paper's better in some cases, but plastics is better in most in the application. So you mentioned the McKinsey report earlier, which is 90+% of applications that they studied showed that plastics would be a better solution. So I think it's important for people to understand that.
I'm going to go make a hard statement here. I'm willing to bet that a very, very large chunk of the applications where plastics is not the better alternative are applications we actually do want to avoid. I mean, I'm not sure that necessarily that a single-use cup, maybe cardboard is better or it's pretty even, but single-use cups is something we should try to limit, because we should try to have reusable cups. To the extent that it's possible. A lot of the places where plastic is not good is because the application is bad. It's not because plastic is bad. And we have to keep that in mind. Is that in use that we want to advocate? No, we don't. Okay, then the material that we're advocating is irrelevant.
If you had a crystal ball, what do you think the plastics industry, but more specifically, the EPS industry looks like in 10 years?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I'd make a lot of money.
Yeah, I know.
I think there are two options, and I'm going to be optimist. I think we're going to be thriving. I'm the internal optimist, and I really hope that we can have people see the arguments that we're making here and make that informed choices. And if we do that, then there will be applications that we won't see. So I really think that we will be doing pretty well. We will see an increased requirement for recycled content, because that will solve the image issue of litter. It will be a resource.
Any other topics we haven't touched on today? We've already talked for about an hour, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to touch on anything you're burning on that we haven't covered.
I think there's a lot of topics we haven't talked on, but I think that's going to be another hour or 2 or 3. So I think we
can definitely do this again if you're interested. I'd love to have you on more than once to talk more about things.
And if there's anything in my newsletter that makes sense for you, follow up. Or I'm also happy if you can find some of the people that we're trying to have a conversation with and ask them the questions. I'll be more than sort of trying to do that. I did have at some of the INCs talk to some of the NGOs. I don't understand this. Can you help me? And they was like, no, I don't want to talk. Since I hope that the NGOs are doing it out of their best intentions, maybe they can ask the question to me that makes me see, oh yeah, I see your point, and make me reflect on the cognitive biases that I might have. Because I have one rule. I only advocate stuff that I believe. And I have actually told some of my members, this application does not make sense in Denmark. I will no longer advocate it. So EPS polystyrene packaging chips, I told them I am not going to be advocating for those, because the way we have waste management in Denmark, it's not usable. And there are a ton of other applications that can solve that. And it will not go to the waste municipal collection site. It will end up in the mixed waste and will cornstarch, or if it's being selected and recycled, it'll be mixed with all this stuff. So I don't think that's an application that's going to survive. And I told them I can't really say that that's where EPS comes into play, because it does not use the benefits of EPS. It's not form mold. It doesn't have the optimal cushioning strengths and stuff like that. I told them I cannot defend that product, and they said that's fine. They actually told some policymakers that they're getting out of it, because they could see it's not a product we want to make anymore.
Good news when people see the light.
Yeah, and so maybe some of the NGOs we can have the conversation and we can understand them.
Spending a lot of time trying to connect with NGOs. The NGO part's difficult, but I've got a couple people lined up that are on the other side of the argument that I want to have conversations with. But if I can get a leader at one of the NGOs that's anti-plastics, I'd for sure love some support, because I'll tell you, I'm not the smartest youngest guy in the room, so having other voices in that conversation would be helpful for me. On this episode is I'll make sure to link your LinkedIn, and if you wanted to send me your organization's website too, I'll make sure to put that on there if you'd like. But really appreciate you joining today, Chresten. Learned something from you, which is great. Yeah, I love doing this because I learn something every time, and I like talking to people. So that's two good things to do a podcast with. But I think hopefully everybody that listened learned something today. And this, once again, has been the Redefining Plastics Podcast. Appreciate you joining today, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching the video. Please click on one of these other links, like and subscribe. Appreciate the support.